So again, thank you all for coming. It is an actual honor that I'm able to introduce Dr. Strayhorn because I was introduced to his work when Dr. Smith had used his work for his doctorates. So and I got to meet him at Akron, Ohio at a summit that I was at, and it was absolutely amazing. So today's topic is You Belong and Matter, a quest for racial equity and justice in higher education. Dr. Terrell Strayhorn is the provost and senior vice president of academic affairs and professor of urban education in the Evelyn Reed Syphax School of Education at Virginia Union University, where he also serves as the director of the Center for the Study of HBCUs. He is a faculty affiliate at Rutgers University's Center for Minority Serving Institutions and several other national research institutes. An internationally recognized education equity expert, Strayhorn's research commitments center on the social psychological determinants of student success for minoritized, and other vulnerable populations. His pioneering research on college students' sense of belonging has informed state policy reform, transformed campus and school practices, and advanced theory and intervention testing. Strayhorn is the specialty chief editor of Frontiers in Education, an associate editor of Social Sciences and Humanities, and author of 200+ scholarly publications. Increasing college student success is a major priority of university campuses. Recent research, some conducted by Dr. Terrell Strayhorn, demonstrates that there are many factors related to diverse college students' success, one of which is a sense of belonging. Students' sense of belonging is powerfully shaped by positive relationships with faculty and staff, welcome climates, supportive services, and affirming policies that signal that they matter. Although not all students experience these equitably, In this session, Dr. Strayhorn invites the University of Lynchburg community into a courageous conversation about this critical topic and how to achieve equity and justice by working together, even while we're physically apart. Dr. Strayhorn, will you?
Yes, and thank you, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And hello to all those who have joined us and who are in the listening audience. I hope I have, are you able to see me and hear me correctly?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Awesome. Well, it's been great to have the opportunity to come and to speak. Certainly, I want to give special thanks to Dr. Canada and his team for building the platform and the space for us to have courageous conversations, which are also, I like to think that they are courageous and they require a level of courage, but I also hope that there's a level of comfort and safety and respect that we can all engage in this conversation that we need to have today and move forward. So like any good speaker, facilitator, instructor, I've got way more content than time. So I don't want to spend too much time with the preliminaries, and I see folks are still joining us, so it's not too late. Grab a neighbor, grab a friend, tell them to come, send the link. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can start moving through this conversation.
And you're good.
Great. And are you seeing just one slide?
Yes.
All right. So again, good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to come and to talk with you today about a really important conversation that is certainly part of what we need to be discussing in terms of racial equity, social justice, educational purpose. And so I want to move through some concepts and weave together insights about both sense of belonging, which has been the focus, continues to be the focus of my, excuse me, my research and scholarly work, and some of the latest insights from there. I want to connect that science and those scientific discoveries about educational belonging and student success to issues of mattering, but to frame it in a way that courageously addresses racial equity and what that means, as well as some educational justice factors, and then close for some discussion. So as we round out the discussion, move toward the end of this, I'll stop and engage in some Q&A. But I encourage you to, my screens are now full with slides, and so feel free to use the chat at any point in time to, park a thought or reflection, or to raise a question that we can engage together a little bit later in the Q&A. And periodically I'll stop, and I'm happy to pull my screen down and talk about some of the things I'm sharing. But, I've titled this discussion, this courageous conversation, "You Belong and You Matter, the quest for racial equity and justice in higher education." And I'm really excited to have the opportunity to connect with the University of Lynchburg, and special thanks to Dr. Canada for the opportunity to come, not only to come and speak to the campus, but to speak in Black History Month, which is 1 month that is designated across the nation to acknowledge and celebrate the accomplishments, the achievements, the contributions, and even the lives of African Americans, Black Americans across the globe, but certainly in the context of the US. And it's an important time always, and it doesn't have to be just in February that we celebrate and acknowledge the meaningful and significant contributions of African Americans and Black Americans, Black people, individuals who trace their ancestral origins back to the diaspora. Doesn't have that only happen in February, although I appreciate the fact that February is a time where we do pause and think about it. And it's an important time to talk about issues of race and racial justice and racism. So the outline for our time today is I want to talk a little bit very, very briefly about where we are in higher education, talking about students in today's context. I want to move pretty quickly into issues and data around racial equity, educational justice. Within just a few slides, I'm going to be into the work on belonging. We're going to spend some time there digging down to understand it, apply it to higher education, frame it so that all of us can use it, whether we are students, faculty, staff, deans, directors, coordinators, alumni, board members, executive leaders, and then wrap it around some issues of mattering and what we're witnessing amid the multiple pandemics. And you'll understand, hopefully, even now, but if not in a couple slides, why number 4 is not a typo with that S, because I believe that we are actually experiencing multiple pandemics in higher education in the world right now. And then we'll move to some discussion around some applications for practice, as well as some Q&A. Courageous conversations like this, to me, are opportunities for us to come together, both prior to COVID, it would have been in person. Because of COVID, we come together in a virtual space like this. Nevertheless, we are together and can be connected. And we come together for courageous conversations as an opportunity for us to have a meeting or a gathering. And typically when folks put together meetings like this, conversations like this, events like this, we frame it around staff development, professional development, student development. We're all trying to grow and develop. And what this is today, Courageous Conversations, is a conversation or a meeting of people who are like-minded. I'm at a different institution, you're at the University of Lynchburg. Though we're at different institutions, we share some things in common. May not be our race, it may not be our gender, it may not be our political perspectives or affiliations, but like in mind, how we think about some things, not all things, but some of them. And so we come together in courageous conversations to discuss a topic that is of mutual concern to us: racial equity, diversity and inclusion, student success, and that through this discussion, this exchange, we strive to identify what are those matters of common concern, the things that we hold in common. And through this conversation, if it's done the right way, I'm hoping by the end, we'll realize that there's some things that we agree upon, hold in common, can reach consensus about. But we'll also realize there are some things that we might not agree upon, that we might not think the same way about, but that we can, through this conversation, this courageous conversation and discussion, we can adjust those differences. Sometimes it might move some of us in a different direction than what we were thinking before. For others, it may be that aha moment, like, oh my goodness, I've always done this. It's not that, I am going to stop doing what I'm doing in the classroom, or there's a certain way I advise and work with students, but now I've got a language, I've got a lens for understanding why I'm doing the way I'm doing and how it connects to the larger work of the university. And of course, the University of Lynchburg is one of many colleges and universities in the country. And so we have a system of higher education. We've got about 21 million, almost 22 million students enrolled in colleges and universities. And of course, if you're keeping up with the trends, we are witnessing in higher education some ebbs and flows. Some institutions are growing or at least maintaining their enrollment. Some other institutions are losing students and enrollments. And we've got pretty solid data out of the National Clearinghouse suggesting that, we've got some populations of students where we have significantly fewer enrolled in this fall than we had in a prior fall. And so we're going to drill down a bit to think about not only that at the national level, but what does that mean and how is that playing out on the campus at the University of Lynchburg? So we got 21 million students, 4,300 colleges and universities about, and it's really interesting because the math doesn't work. And I'm hoping that either there's some math majors, math minors, math faculty, or folks who like numbers in the audience. And you would know that these numbers don't really they don't align very easily. You got a large system, right? A lot of students who are accommodated across a lot of different universities, but all of us, your institution and mine, many of us use this one student-centered approach where we want to address our programs and services and policies and opportunities to the student. We all realize that students are different. Their backgrounds are different. They may come from the same zip code, but just because they come from the same zip code or the same high school doesn't mean their strengths and opportunities, their challenges and inhibitors are the same. And so it's our philosophy, our educational philosophy, this commitment to the student-centered. On my own campus, we call it student-driven approach. And the reason why we sort of pivoted in that language is I found a lot of times in discussions when we talk about student-centered, we keep the student at the center. That's really important. But sometimes I would find conversations, maybe it would be with faculty, where the concern is about student readiness for college, students' effort in the classroom. It's keeping the student centered in the conversation. They are at the center of discussion, but it's often blaming the student. It is often centering them and then putting responsibility on them, which is, exonerating or freeing the institution, the faculty, the staff, the governance structures for their responsibility towards student success. So this idea of shifting from just centering the student to also understanding it's the student who drives us as an institution has been one way of trying to build momentum in a different direction for moving the institution forward. At the University of Lynchburg, of course, this calculus can be different, but still similar. And that is, you got about 3,100 college students. You got an institution in Lynchburg, and you have still this commitment to student-centered. But all of us, as enrollment increases and decreases, as the need of students change over the course of time, we've got students who come to college and they want certain majors or they want certain minors. Some students come and they want access to workout and fitness facilities. They want they want it to do research. They want to join certain clubs or sports. They come with all sorts of different needs. Colleges and universities start to vie to offer, to meet that need, to offer to the student, brace yourself, higher education is a business. It is. We, as institutions, operate much more like businesses and industries than we do any other sort of industry or any other sort of system. And so although we realize that we are not business as usual, we certainly can think about the student and their families as the consumer. We can think about ourselves as the provider of an educational service, of an experience. And what happens in this competitive market that we're in, while we're all trying to maximize market share, that is, we want as many students as we can get to come and meet our enrollment goals, we're all trying to use a myriad set of processes and recruitment strategies and offerings of academic and non-academic or social support services to attract the consumer to our institution. We're also striving to hit a competitive advantage, and competitive advantage, a whole line of literature out of business about this, really refers to the conditions that allow a company or country, in this case an institution, to produce a good or service of equal value but at a lower price. And if you think about competitive advantage, I know there might be people who are saying, no, don't come with all this business language, don't worry, just another slide or two, and then we'll move on back to the comfortable educational language. But I got to tell you, the University of Lynchburg is already in this space. If you go to your home page, front and center, it says small classes, big ideas, better price, right? That is reflective of the institution already responding to those market forces that create the momentum and the force upon us, the net force, to push us from being inert educational institutions that just once existed, had faculty and certain kinds of degrees, and we thought we build it, students will come. And now we're starting to be moved by these forces to say, we've got to compete, and we're striving to create competitive advantage for ourselves so that we can attract the consumer, attract the student, recruitment, and not only recruit them, but I think also another element of competitive advantage often missed in the business discussion, but important for higher education, is that we don't want them just to come and get here. We want them to be successful. And so it's small classes, it's big ideas, it's better price, but it's also ultimately increased graduation rates and student success and students going on to achieve both graduate degrees and to assume and become their greatest possible self. So this tie from recruitment to success moves us to most of what we know about student success. And we've had a whole line of literature about student success. There are all sorts of frameworks. The truth is, we've learned a lot over the past 50 years, 30 years about the whole student departure puzzle, as professors emeritus John Braxton at the University of Vanderbilt University and Professor Vince Tinto, who many who think about student retention, student success will think about. His model is shown on the screen. And what Professor Tinto said is this, that student success, and he was actually studying the opposite, students' lack of success or dropout, attrition. Student success is a function of a lot of different factors, things like their background, their preschool, pre-college schooling, their readiness for college, but it also has a lot to do with what happens in college, their goal commitment, how committed are they to the goal of getting a college degree. We all know students who will come to college and come to the University of Lynchburg. They've come from a good high school, they've taken college prep courses, they have the money to pay for college or can access the aid to be successful, but they're just not terribly committed to the goal of actually getting a college degree. They see lots of possibilities and options for how they can get to their goal, their purpose in life. Maybe they think, if I could just invent something, I don't really need this college degree. If I could just finalize and perfect this invention. We think about all of the leaders in the .com world, in the tech world, Apple, Amazon, a lot of, Bill Gates, all of those would have been folks who probably came into college, if they went at all, and could have been committed to the institution. We know these students who come to the University of Lynchburg saying, I absolutely love the University of Lynchburg. My mom, my dad went here, my grandma went here. I'm gonna go here, and if I ever have kids, and if they could even accept cats and dogs, my pets would go to the University of Lynchburg because I love this place. Those are students who have high institutional commitment. But there are other kinds of commitments, like goal commitment, that also shape these outcomes. I'm not going to take too much time with this model, because what we've learned over time is that as we move from goal commitment into what Vince called the academic and social social system of the institution, that is the extent to which students were what he called integrated into the academic life, integrated into the social life. Those are those sort of fourth column: academic integration, social integration. Really important critique came in the late 90s about this model. It had been first published in the mid 70s, revised in the early 90s, and then as we moved it out of the 90s into the 2000s, there were multiple critiques of this model, especially from an equity lens, an identity-based lens, and helped us understand that the term integration has a historical narrative to it in the US. It has connotations to it. And so this idea that students had to be integrated into the academic and social system of college. In fact, in one of his publications, Professor Tinto went as far as to say that students would have to become so deeply integrated into college life that they would need to sever ties with pre-existing communities. And again, my screens are filled with my slides, so I can't necessarily see who's in the audience, but I'm sure there's someone who would understand that for many students, especially our underrepresented minority students, our first generation students, our immigrant and international students, LGBTQIA students, first generation, low income, no income, for our diverse students, severing ties with pre-existing communities in order to fully integrate into the college life would be, academic suicide, is what one of the critiques called it. It would set them up for failure. It would cut them off from absolutely important life systems, support systems, academic support systems, networks of care and support. So what we've learned over time is that this model really doesn't work for the students who we've opened up the doors of access to in higher education. We've opened the doors for so many groups of students. We still need to do more for lots of students, undocumented students, and those who live at the multiple margins or intersections of all of these identities. But what we've learned is, as we've opened these doors, we've now created a situation where this kind of boxy model, where you have to compartmentalize your identities and your lives and your experiences, simply don't work. And what we've needed for a long time is a model that's not so boxy. That is where I think the science of sense of belonging, my work, picks up. It is grounded in Tinto's model. It is born out of what we know about student retention and student attrition, but it is not the same. It is that sense of belonging sort of focuses starts more fundamental than that. It focuses on the student, the learner, as a human, as a person. Sense of belonging is a basic human need. It refers to the feeling that members matter to one another. Students feel connected, supported, and respected. Students who feel a sense of belonging in college, they trust their faculty, they trust their teachers, they trust their staff and their peers. They feel a sense of fit at the campus, at the institution. And they're not worried about being treated as a stereotype. They're not worried about being mistreated. And they're also not worried about being, listen to this, untreated even. So treatment, I don't want to draw on that metaphor too long because I'm not trying to perpetuate the idea that students of difference or diverse students or students of color are somehow broken and in need of repair and therapy. Although I do think all students need support, all students need care, all students have special needs. They're just different kinds of needs that emerge at different times in different contexts. You'll see this as we move through the model a bit. But students who feel a sense of belonging, they are confident that they are seen as a person of value at their institution. In the book I write that students perceive social support on campus is a feeling or a sensation of connectedness. It's the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued, important to the group, to others on campus. And the interesting thing that we've learned, or that I've learned from my work, is that most students who come to the University of Lynchburg or the Virginia Union University, my own institution, all of our institutions, students don't often start at the place of belonging. They often start at the place of belonging uncertainty. It is that something happened to attract them to our campus. Again, could be that their mom, dad, sister, brother, grandmother, uncle went to the institution. It could be that a recruiter made their way to their high school, talked to them about the institution, or that there was a pipeline or pathway program that sort of turned them, had them interested in the institution from middle school or high school, or they stepped foot on our campus. And all of a sudden they're interested in going to our institution. But then when they step foot, they matriculate, they enroll, they now start to, again, wonder, do I belong here? Can people like me be successful here? Will I make friends? Will people like me? Will I do well? Do I have what it takes to be successful? And students who are uncertain about their belonging start to search for cues that resolve that question for them. They may see it on the faculty, right? They go into the classroom, they see a faculty member who looks like them, a faculty member in a discipline that resonates with their interest. They may not see it at the front of the classroom, which is, but again, there's huge implications around this conversation for diversifying the faculty, for making sure that we're recruiting and retaining our all faculty, women faculty, diverse faculty, that we're also making sure that our evaluation systems are fair and equitable across all dimensions of identity and difference, so that our faculty can be promoted through the ranks and from one level to the next, because not only is that important for their own professional development, their own work satisfaction, but it also has implications for student success, because students who belong succeed. Students who see faculty who look like them, feel a sense of belonging, are more likely to succeed. Students who see people like them doing well, faring well in the organization at the campus, start to believe that they can do it. This is that whole possible self. There's a whole literature on that. I won't go too far into that. There's more of that that I'm happy to share some references with, but it's simply to say that students are often growing and changing cognitively and psychologically and emotionally to arrive at being their best possible self. I used to say it is impossible to become something you've never seen. Until I woke up one day, looked at the mirror, and realized that can't possibly be true, because moving through my educational experience, I never saw a Black professor. So how is it that it was possible for me to become one? Well, it's difficult to become something you've never seen, but it's not impossible, because when we start to build and connect communities of care, build communities of care around students, they start to experience, speakers, guest speakers, lecturers, mentors, advisors, coaches, internship supervisors who might look like them or might not look like them, but can encourage their aspirations and help them believe that what they're trying to pursue is possible. Let me just show you this because I think it's an important piece of the conversation around belonging. This is really the belonging model in practice. And this model has really served, I think, as an effective visual guide to me and my explanation of sense of belonging in a lot of different contexts. Hopefully you find this helpful as well. Most will recognize Maslow's hierarchy as the foundation. It's the triangle in the middle. It also serves as the foundational grounding of my research on this topic. Maslow says, in short, that as humans, start there, we're all humans, we're all people. And because of that, we have basic needs like air and water, food, shelter, sleep, and other things. And so, you know, when you start to ask questions around, like, why are we dealing with and talking about food insecurities and housing insecurities in higher education? We weren't talking about that a decade ago a lot. Why? Because we've realized, I think through some of Brene Brown's work, some of the culturally responsive work, that as these movements have happened in education, it's reminded us of the most fundamental part. If we're going to be student-centered or student-driven, the student is human, and so are we all, that we have these basic needs that connect us. And until these basic physiological needs, until students have access to food and shelter and healthy water, that was the Flint, Michigan water crisis, and how it complicated and, you know, got in the way of all the efforts that they were trying to do around healthy and flourishing neighborhoods and schools, that until students have these basic physiological needs, that higher order needs cannot be considered. We can't foster belonging, we can't create success, we can't raise graduation rates until these basic physiological needs are in place. So even as a provost, I understand that there's an institutional responsibility to be attentive to these physiological needs and to be responsive to it, you know, applied to practice. And so their higher order needs, safety and security, physical, emotional, financial, and food. Right above that, sort of midway, the triangle is love and belonging. As students need care and support and mattering and friends and mentors, people who care about them, that they trust. And with these in place, they start to build confidence in their academic skills. They start to build respect for themselves and respect in others. And that translates, that academic self-efficacy, we've known this for years, translates into achievement and performance and, you know, good attendance and mastery of content. And as they move from these levels, they can start to move into the apex of the triangle: self-actualization, creativity, innovation, self-authorship, morality, spontaneity. If you look to the sides of the triangle, what I'm simply saying is that in terms of the institution, this is a movement from our basic functions as an institution: supplying housing, supplying food services, supplying, you know, making sure that students have access to learning labs and facilities, that it's moving from our basic functions up to fulfillment of our highest educational mission. If you go to our mission statement, you're going to see words like lifelong learner and participation in democracy and innovative thinkers. And we'll never get there. We'll never fulfill our educational mission until we deal with this middle band around love and belongingness. And on the student or the individual front, we're moving from where they start, which for most college students is sleep and more sleep. And getting them to their fullest potential will never move them to their fullest potential, their fullest possible selves, without first dealing with this middle band. And so, you know, we know a lot of things happen in college. This middle part helps us realize that these physiological needs and safety and security needs are important. They are priority. They must be attended to. But the mere presence of food doesn't satisfy that psychological need. It's not that a student has food today. It's that we've got to be thinking about how does a student get and have the security of food provisions or the security of housing provisions. You know, even in COVID, many campuses, like my own, we closed, you know, the campus. We had students on campus in the fall, transitioned off campus in November. One of the things we learned, pick up from that moment, was the moment we closed campus, moved students off, we did it for those, safety and security, right? But we also, by doing that, created other insecurities for students around food, because some students were dependent on the cafeteria, on the dining services, dining halls for access to regular provision of food. We created insecurities for some of our students around housing, because some of our students were dependent on the residence halls being open so that they could stay there. And we've learned from that we will not repeat that in this coming semester as we transition toward the end, and some students may pivot or transition off campus. We won't close the campuses or the residence halls. And then safety and security also even comes alive in different ways as we think about virtual learning and virtual spaces, where we've always thought about protecting the physical safety and security of our campuses, of our classrooms, of our residence halls. It's why we have campus security. It's why we use IDs and card swipes and restrict access to certain buildings and have operating hours. But as we move to an online space, we realize the need to protect our students from Zoom bombing and cyberbullying and other ransomware kinds of threats. And so there's all sorts of development of new policies around cyberbullying and social media use, online instructional use, and all of that is the work of belonging. So when we start to revise the student handbook to make sure that we are protecting our students from cyberbullying, protecting our students and faculty from Zoom bombing, when we increase our infrastructure and put appropriate protections in place in IT and instructional technology to make sure that our students can learn free from threat and free from attack, we are doing the work of belonging, and we're doing the work of student success. We're creating spaces where students are more likely to thrive and more likely to develop the confidence and to achieve and to perform. So all of this points to those connections between the model. And before I transition, I think all of this is important because right now we are moving and living in a space where students want to belong, but students also want to feel cared about. They want to know that they are on the mind of the institution, that we are taking steps to handle or deal with their belonging. And to me, that really comes to the notion of mattering. In the book, I walk through 7 elements. I won't, for the sake of time, go through all of that, but I just want to highlight here. Mattering is related to belonging, and it's got about 4 different components to it. One is that it's attention, it's feeling noticed, recognized. Others know and remember my name. Dependence. People look to me for advice or need me, value me, and my contribution. It's about ego extension, this idea that people want me to succeed. They care about me and my success, feeling that others are proud of one's success and that they'll sympathize or even empathize with one's failures. And importance, that I am the object of someone else's concern. I'm cared about. I've got lots of examples that I talk about in my research that I've learned through surveys and interviews with students. I remember one time being on a campus, this was when we were physically traveling and moving about, and I had gone for a student success forum where the provost was and president were having all the deans come together to talk about student success. And so they had invited some students to be part of a panel. As I arrived to the place where I was going to give my lecture, they had name tags on the table. And I remember one of their students approaching the table and said, "Oh, wow, you know, they've got name tags." And they looked and they saw their name and they grabbed their tag and said, "Wow, they got one for me." It's that, wow, they've got one for me, that reflects the notion of mattering, that I feel noticed. They remembered me, that I've got a name tag. My name is on it and it's spelled correctly. When you take that metaphor and apply it to practice across all of our various functional areas, how many times, how are we making sure that all students know that we see them, we recognize them, we notice them, we remember their name, and we know it, we spell it correctly, we pronounce it correctly. But then where are those places and spaces where some students arrive at the proverbial table and don't see their name tag, don't see a place for them? You know, the students who feel like the institution thinks about them, notices them, feel like they matter. And when they feel like they matter, they feel like they belong. When they feel like they belong, they're set up for success. Dependence is this idea that people need me and they value my contributions, and importance. And so these are 4 elements of mattering, but it also really tracks well onto what I've talked about in my research around the 4 messages of belonging. So I want to show you what those are and then show you them in practice, move to some thoughts about equity, and then stop for some discussion here. All right, so in my research, I'm trying to understand more and more about belonging, what it is, what it's not, how does it play out in college context, both at all levels, and you'll see this in the next slide. And then, of course, the most interesting, maybe I shouldn't say the most interesting, but one of the most enticing parts of this work is, how do we use it? Can we change and manipulate, alter belonging for students? And what I've learned is there are 4 key messages of belonging. There are many, but there are 4 that really show up to be quite effective in terms of research. And that is, first, that to help ground or normalize, and I put normal in quotes because I try not to use that language much anymore, especially from a diversity lens, from an equity lens, because I think normal only makes sense to the extent that you try to understand it up against something that you're framing as not normal, or it is normal has a reference group, and that reference group becomes the opposite of normal, or non-normal, unnormal. And there are lots of normals. I mean, we're living right now from whatever we remember pre-COVID that we called normal into the new normal. And what we'll probably find by fall, I believe, in higher education is yet another normal. And we're going to move through a couple of years of new normals. And so this is probably better referred to as the commonality of the sense of feeling out of place. All students feel out of place. It's not just undergrads, it's not just grads, it's not just first-year students, it's not just African-American and Hispanic or Latinx or Latino and Latino students. And I think it is quite common for students to come to college and to wonder, do I fit here? Where are my people? Where are my friends? What are the groups that I will join? Do I matter? So that's the first key message of belonging. And that if you're going to really foster belonging and try to alter it, the first thing you got to do is help all students understand that it's okay to feel uneasy about college, perhaps even out of place. It's also common for many students to feel lonely at first. I've met hundreds and hundreds of students, both in surveys and interviews, who start college feeling extremely lonely. Either lonely in class, lonely in their major, lonely in their minor, lonely in their residence hall or the laboratory or on the field or in the club, missing their family, missing their young siblings, you know, lonely, not in the masses of people, but lonely as they start to evolve into their possible self, and learning more about who they are and what their interests are. That can, you know, we all know from a learning perspective that awareness of greater awareness of oneself creates movement. You move from where you once were to a new place where you start to think differently and interpret things differently. And when you arrive at that new place that you've not been before, because you've now read something in college, or you had a professor who showed a video and it's got you thinking in new and different ways, that when you get to that new place, it can be quite lonely at first because you don't know others who share that same experience, or who share that mindset with you. And that is normal, that is common, that is usual for students. And it is absolutely common for students to doubt their abilities. It's not that you are not college material. It's not that everybody you know, around you it's why, you know, in large laboratory classes or large lecture halls, when the instructor says, all right, I've talked for 30 minutes, any questions? Hardly ever does someone rush to raise their hand, because one, we have been socialized, we've conditioned all learners in this country to believe that by raising your hand, you are acknowledging that you either have doubt, you're unclear, you need help, or you don't get it. And what we really need to do is start building spaces where raising your hand is normalized, where raising your hand is routine, where raising your hand is positively reinforced and encouraged. But students hardly ever raise their hand in those large lecture halls first, because the common thought psychologically, the first place where most students go when they don't understand something is, I'm the only one who doesn't get this. I'm the only one who's failing this quiz. I'm the only one who didn't understand the reading. I'm the only one who wasn't selected for the fraternity or the sorority. I'm the only one who didn't make the cut for the team. And what we've got to do if we're going to foster belonging is, as an institution across all levels, we've got to start helping students understand that all students doubt their ability initially. And the most important thing is that while you might feel out of place and you might feel lonely and you might doubt your abilities and you might not think you have support, that all of these feelings dissipate with time. So working with some colleges and universities, one that I like to talk about is the work that's been done at Amherst College, which has really taken the belonging science and through some of the partnerships and work together has built the belonging campaign. I want to talk about this and then show you how it really plays out across all the levels. Right now it's manifested at Amherst College, one of many that I could show as a website, their belonging campaign. You know, if I trusted technology, I could click this button, this pops up into a video, and you would hear from Jonathan. And what Jonathan does in a very short video is he reinforces the very messages I just gave you. Through his words, he talks about when he first got to college and he felt lonely and how he didn't know if he would make friends, and he got into courses, and some courses he understood and sometimes he didn't, and he started doubting whether he was ready. But he learned that those feelings dissipate with time, that as he made friends, as he partnered with people in classrooms, that it got rid of the feelings of alienation and isolation and the doubts about his own ability. And as you can see, I hope from the screen, there are a whole list of folks who you can listen to, and through their photography and their own words, you know, it happened that they reinforce these messages around belonging. Let me get ready to wrap up by showing you how this relates to belonging, equity, a more ecological perspective. This is a big slide. Don't be overwhelmed by it. It's a lot to talk through, but I'll highlight the pieces of it. On the left-hand side, you see the 4 levels. Most work that's happening in belonging at colleges and universities in this country, in my opinion, happen at level 1. we're focusing on the student, and that's important because the student is the center, the student is the driver, the student is the consumer, the student is our focus, must be our focus. And as we start to think about interventions to foster belonging for students, we think about looking at the student's background factors and how can we start to help the student feel better, to understand that these feelings that they have dissipate with time. That's that individual level. There's a second level that's around family and friends and social support. And here is where, excuse me, you know, we would, in the intervention space, start to really build ongoing support for the student, wrap around kind of support services, though, that students who come in the first year, you saw this a few years ago in higher education when we had the mass movement toward first year experiences. And we did a great job of building summer bridge programs to get students connected to our campus and to feel that community of support. We built first year seminars so that they got into the first year of college and started to really fashion and build those learning competencies around critical thinking and writing and discovery of college and vocation, and matching that with these educational plans that would give them momentum to move through the years. And some of us even started having learning communities in the first year where students started living together and learning together. But what happened? We built so much support, both at the individual and the level 2, that when the student graduated to the second year, quite honestly, sophomores started saying, I don't want to be a sophomore. I want to stay a freshman. I want to stay a first year because there was so much support. What happened to my first year seminar? What happened to the connections with faculty? And so then you had the invention of the sophomore year experience that started to do similar things with a different thrust to it, because now the student is more adjusted to college, presumably, and could spend more time figuring out, how do I explore? How do I sort through major change? And starting to connect with the learning groups just adjacent to campus, internships and work study kinds of experiences. And what we need really is a first year, second year, junior year, senior year experience for all the 4 years, so that students are constantly moving through these networks of support throughout the college experience. We hardly ever really spend a lot of time thinking about level 3, which is the organization and the personnel. Although I got to show you, that's where we start talking about the resources, the teamwork, the partnerships, the collaborations, the climate issues that really have to be addressed for students to feel a sense of belonging. And we start to use data and information to address those equity gaps around gender and race and other dimensions of identity. And then level 4, with policy and community, this is where we really start to draft and formulate policies that will foster belonging, create connectedness and community. We use policy to remove those process walls. I'm thinking about, you know, as students come to college and they need to feel a sense of belonging, we know that at the individual student level, there are all sorts of interventions, like making sure that they know they can register, they can set up their schedule and be registered and start their courses, that they have access to the technology, they can get into the learning management system to learn and to connect with their faculty member, that they are able to connect with their faculty to get support, even in virtual office hours. Lots of level 1, level 2 kinds of thinking there. But the level 4 piece is when we start to formulate the policies to make sure that all faculty have access, that all faculty are holding virtual office hours so that all students get the support that they need. Because otherwise, without the policy that's making it common practice, then we create inequities where some students get access to faculty if they're in a certain major or if they have access to a certain program or experience, but not all students. So you got the 4 levels, you have interventions mapped out on those levels. And then what we're trying to do is really create a connected campus, a high-touch environment where students and faculty and other stakeholders come together to ultimately produce the outcomes that we want, and that is the educational outcomes, achievement and retention and persistence and graduation, where we can avoid pitfalls, where students have maximum high quality experiences with care. I love thinking about faculty and staff, not just as faculty and staff or personnel, but as care providers. That's a language that we often use in health fields, but we need to think about what it would mean for reframing our work, especially our equity work, our racial equity work around belonging. If we thought of ourselves as care providers and the level of care and the communities of care that must be built to help students be successful, support them to being successful in higher education. So we close then with a couple of ideas. Yes, we're trying to create high-touch environments marked by safety, security, and consistent communication. We're trying to personalize these interactions where students get quality time with faculty, staff, peers. We're also trying to offer relevant, accurate information about what students must do in order to be successful. I think a lot about academic norming campaign. We in health fields, medical fields, higher education, medical spaces. Years ago, we used to have social norming campaigns. It was all around drinking behaviors and substance abuse behaviors for college students. And what we tried was, if you put out messages, signs. This was back in the day of most everything being paper. Big signs on tables where you told students, hey, did you know that your peers actually only drink so much every weekend? That we thought by putting out that information, it would reduce students' drinking behaviors, and it would promote healthy behaviors amongst students. And what we learned from that research is that the results were kind of muted. Sometimes it did work, but quite often students did not trust the information. They never believed that what was shown on the sign was actually true, because we all know the one student who drinks significantly more. And then the person who's above the norm becomes the one who influences the student's behavior. So we changed that from this sort of general message to looking at more social networking analysis, where we tried to figure out who is it that the student is hanging around, so that we could put out messages about what do student athletes do? What do students leaders do? What do African-American students do? What do first generation students do? And so I'm thinking about how we might use this in an academic norming way to help students know what their peers do to excel, to achieve. Did you know that the average student at the University of Lynchburg studies this many hours a day, carries this many credits per semester, is at this point, at the midpoint when early alert and midterm grades come out, takes this amount of time in order to graduate, carries this amount of educational debt, borrows this much, connects with a faculty member on average this many times. The student at the University of Lynchburg who's on the dean's list, on average, meets with the professor this many times, meet with their advisor multiple times per year. These are the kinds of messages that, when they are timely and accurate and sent consistently, and of course now we don't have to wait for paper stuff, we can send it out digitally, we can put it on social media, we can use all sorts of instant message kind of technology to get it to students. It not only give students accurate performance expectations, but if I know what's expected of me, I'm much more confident in my ability to do it. So if you think about that pyramid, we're changing confidence, we're changing esteem, we're tracking on to belonging, because now I know what's expected of me. I feel much more like I belong here. It's hard to feel like you belong in a place where you don't know any of the rules. You don't know how things get done, what's expected of you. But as we change expectations, we change belonging, then we change performance, and ultimately student success. Let me then show one more, and that is that as we move through quite a bit of this, I've realized a lot of things that I've shared are really true. But I close with an important message, and that is that each and every one of us plays a role in fostering belonging, dealing with equity, especially racial equity. Equity really is, a society is equitable when the distribution of services and benefits, like I said, in a higher ed context, it's when the distribution of support, financial aid, office hours, community of care, time with faculty, time with senior level administrators, messages, space in the classroom, at the front of the classroom, on the website, in the curriculum. When that is distributed in a way that is not determined by one's identity, racial identity, it's not disproportionate. It is equivalent. It's proportional rather than equivalent. It's proportional based on identity, so that at any point in time, you might see this, which is on the screen, or you might see at other times a more diverse group. And you can see women and men and people of color and science majors and artists and first years and seniors and folks who are from Virginia and folks who are not from Virginia, all in the same space, so that we're trying to build a space where we're creating equity across dimensions of identity, especially racial identity, where students feel that they are connected, cared about, as if they matter, and they belong. Let me stop here so that I can entertain some questions.
Dr. Strayhorn, thank you so much for your presentation, definitely. There's a lot that I could ask, but I think we don't have a lot of time for that, so maybe another time. But I do want to take it up to everyone else first, if they have any questions, to go ahead and you can unmute, or you can put it in the chat and I can definitely read them out to Dr. Strayhorn, or you can just go from there.
I have a question that comes more from my background of having been a graduate student at a large research one university and having to TA classes where we would actually have a large number of immigrant students who did not necessarily have a grasp on grammar and spelling because it was their second language, understandably so, and trying to find that balance of fairness to all students in grading papers, but while also recognizing that there was this additional challenge for other students. And that was something that I felt like that university never really addressed or trained us in balancing. So I was kind of wondering your thoughts on that.
Such a good point. Goes back to sort of where our conversation began, and that is as the doors of higher education access have opened, and we have not necessarily changed the model of higher education. We just open the door to more people. We create, through our good intentions, all of these new problems for ourselves, right? Inequities, where just because we open the door to students from urban, suburban, and rural contexts doesn't mean that we got the institution ready to accommodate students who, don't live in an urban setting, don't live close to campus, can't just go home very easily on breaks and holidays, can't necessarily, and the other part is students who come from what I'm going to call cultural contexts. Cultural, and I don't mean that in a more racial and ethnic, although it is connected to that, but I'm talking culture, a system of words and language and art and history that constitute a group, right? So we now know that we have welcomed to our campuses students who I used to do this exercise in some of my classes, training my graduate students in education. I would ask them, how many of you growing up we're told that, you can be anything you want to be in the world. And you, in a large group, can watch how many hands go up. How many of you growing up heard that you were going to have to work super hard in this world to get something, and you probably would only get half of what you worked for, right? And you could watch not only hands go up, but the beautiful thing about it is you could watch, and I'm talking somewhat poetically here, but I mean, you could watch the complexion of the hands that go up. You could watch the stretch and the diversity of the hands that go up. Some tall, some short, some black, some brown, some muscular like mine, not, joking. All these things would happen, and it would show you that some of these cultural messages are raced, some of them are classed, some of them are geographically situated and bound. But think about it, we invite them all to the University of Lynchburg. We invite them all to Virginia Union University, and they bring with them different experiences around language, different experiences around punctuation and expression, vernacular. And yet, has our institution adopted an inclusive lexicon where all of those languages and expressions and cultures matter and are valued? Because that's the belonging piece, valued and celebrated and respected? Absolutely not. We know that it's you got to adjust to this norm. And so that is, and by the way, as a professor, that's my core identity. It's what I long to be always seen as. I love teaching, love working with students, love thinking about these issues. And I'm not saying, although sometimes people think it in these conversations, I'm saying water it down, don't make them learn, grammar, don't make them learn APA format. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is an equity mindset helps me understand the work that must go in, the support that must be provided, dare I even say the culturally responsive work that I've got to do as an institution at all those 4 levels to make sure that I'm providing the support that my students need in order to traverse the space that I created, right? I brought them. And I say this all the time. Well, I can't say all the time. I started saying it last year more directly. And that is the moment we admit them, we've created a contract with them, right? I believe it because we had options at the point of admission. Once we admit them, the institution has an obligation to do all it can to make sure that that student will be successful. What the offer of admission means to me in my mind is that we are saying, hey, Christy, come to us and we will do everything we can to make sure you're successful. You got stuff you got to do, absolutely. But process walls, barriers, limited access to technology or information, bad instructors. I know there are no bad instructors at University of Lynchburg. I'm talking about all the other institutions in the country. But bad instructors, limited curriculum materials, buildings that are not easily accessible depending on how you maneuver in the world and your ability to access the buildings, all that stuff, we're going to remove that for you. And the moment you make us aware of another barrier, we will do what we must do to use the 4 levels, start intervention to remove or address that problem. Because we as an institution, by admitting you said, we will not allow anything in our institution to be a barrier to your success. We are not saying we know everything that's a barrier to your success, but that we will work on it. And we don't do that enough in higher education. What we do is we just admit students. And then, interestingly enough, I've seen campuses where when the student's not successful, we are far more likely to blame the student than we are to blame the institution. I'm not trying to blame either side. I'm just trying to calibrate that conversation so we can see possibilities on either. Hope that provided some thoughts about your question.
It did. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Strayhorn, this is Robert. Dr. Perot put in the chat box, and it's not so much of a question, but a statement, but you may have an answer to it or a response. It says, is Phil more removed than ever for my students this year, which we all can understand that. He said, I appreciate your point about office hours. Tough, since students simply can't pop in like normal. I'm emailing my classes and advisees, reminding them to connect with me. Need help on making it happen.
Yes.
Any advice?
Yeah, so it is a very good point. And here's what I'm going to say. And Robert, you should kick me under the table, but except it's virtual, so I don't know how you're going to do that. But you can work on that while I'm talking. If this is a comment that I'm thinking through now is, I'm learning more and more about, because prior to COVID, a lot of the work on belonging was in person. It's about students creating high touch environments. And of course, we've always been teaching online or accessing materials online. But now that we are, much more of what we do is online than anywhere else, I'm realizing that there are just some parts of the experience that are difficult to duplicate online. I think that's a major pickup from COVID. I think it's going to be a major pickup for higher education going forward. That's why I don't think, institutions that think, oh my gosh, everybody is online, we'll never go back. What's the future of the university? I think I was on one of those kind of panels or podcasts a few weeks ago. And my point was this, it's going to be a new normal, but we're going to still come back together because our students, our faculty, our staff, our parents, the alumni, we are all tolerating this 100% virtual. We want it to be better. We want it to feel more natural, but we realize that, exactly as David said, students can't pop in like they used to. You can create avatars and build profiles in the learning management system and ask students to go to the discussion board and use it to share about their day, but that's just nothing like bumping into each other in the student activities building, or bumping to each other outside, or stopping by a faculty member's office, or even hanging after class. So, I think your idea, your strategy of emailing your students and your advisees, reminding them to connect with you is the right way to go. Definitely posting and sharing office hours. The other part that I've learned is some students don't know what to do. Well, actually, I have told this before in a story. I met a student who once said why he was confused why they were called office hours, because the term office hour has a time in it, and it's called hour. And for some students who are newcomers, again, back to Christy's point, we've opened up the door of higher education to first generation. I've met students, you've met students, you have students who are not only first generation, that is first in their immediate family to go to college. I've met, interviewed, surveyed students who are the first in their zip code to go to college. As one student said, I'm the first in my whole entire church to go to college, so much so that they took up an offering for me the Sunday before I had to go because they all want me to be successful. Now, imagine the weight and responsibility on that student's shoulder, and how much of a community of care we must build for them in order for them to be successful. So I think as students who are newcomers to this space come and they see this language that makes no sense to them, like office hour, and they're afraid, oh my gosh, I got to stay there for an hour. Well, actually, you don't have to stay there for an hour. Office hour can be in 15-minute increments. So I think anything that you can do to help a student decode that experience, understand how to move through it. I've built some tools. I don't know if you remember Mad Libs. These were those short phrasal tools growing up where you could sort of put a verb, put a noun, put a word, and then read the sentence. It was kind of comical. Where we've built tools for students, Mad Libs for office hours. And again, I'm happy to send that to you, Robert, and you can share it with your campus or post it on your website, where students can go to office hours and they learn how to ask a question, how to ask or probe or follow up, how to, because a lot of times help seeking is hard. It's the equivalent of trying to raise your hand in that big lecture hall. You just don't know after you read. Have you ever read something, been so confused by the end that you don't even know if you have a question? And if you do, you certainly don't know how to phrase it. Well, these kinds of tools help students do that. Why is that important? Because if I can get a tool that will help me connect with Professor David and make me use office hours, virtually or in person, I'm one, starting to get the clarity I need to have the confidence that I must have to put forth the effort to be successful. But by the same token, I'm also connecting with the professor. So I'm building connections. And maybe, depending on how Professor David or professors in the audience might frame their office hours, sometimes professors will take students in groups or intentionally cause overlap between students. I used to do that, where I would structure my office hours so that as one student is wrapping up, another student is available. And then as I, pre-COVID, as I'm walking one out of my office, I could introduce them to someone else who they might not know. But what I was doing it intentionally because it was creating small dyads and triads of learning partnerships, students who knew students in the class by name who could become, study buddies as they made their way through my class. I think there are ways that we can think about doing that even virtually, using the waiting room, depending on the technologies you're using. Sometimes Zoom does it, sometimes Google. I don't know Google as well, but I know Zoom and Microsoft Teams allow for those kinds of features. I'll stop there.
We have time just for one more question.
I have a question. Hi, Dr. Strayhorn. Thank you so much for being here. Such an informative presentation and applicable in so many ways. My question is, do you have advice or suggestions on how Black and African American staff at colleges, professional staff, can rally around and support specifically Black and African American students? It's been my experience that many of the students, and just listening to how you've answered other questions, may not know how to seek help and don't see the variety of resources available to them. And so, we have, particularly at the University of Lynchburg, we have very few Black and African American faculty. So the professional staff have come together to try to introduce ourselves to the students and let them know that we are also a resource here to support them and rally around them and assist them however needed. But I don't think they see it as the same as a faculty member reaching out to them. So I just wondered if you had advice or suggestions of how we can extend that support mechanism from the professional staff side to those students who we know need the help, but don't necessarily reach out to us for it.
Yeah, so I can give you a couple of thoughts and insights, and would love to, share more maybe through email or something later. Your point is so well taken. I saw a comment in the chat earlier where they were talking about, someone made the statement that, this is not just about students, it's also about faculty and staff. And, when I first started my, okay, yeah. So it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because I started studying student sense of belonging and was, presenting my research and at campuses, and inevitably every time faculty, staff would say, Dr. Strayhorn, this is not just about students, it's also about me. It's, and in some ways, some of the same elements matter. Faculty want to feel a sense of belonging, must feel, in order for them to experience workplace satisfaction. And it actually, quite honestly, is connected to productivity, performance, commitment to the institution.
Right.
So there are huge implications around the investments that institutions make in faculty and leaders, and then their retention. But to your particular question, I think as we try to help our Black, Indigenous people of color or students of color, there are things that we must do. The first is, I think it is important for us to build relationships with them, and to understand that that is going to happen naturally. I remember saying this as a, early professor, early in my career. Well, actually, that's not true. I read it as a graduate student, that, students of color want faculty of color, and they'll look for faculty of color. So I started my career at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I remember it was like a Thursday. I was in my office working late, grading papers, all the stuff we love to do as faculty. And there was like a clap. It was a rainy day. There was a clap of thunder. I looked at the door. There was a student. There were no Black students in my grad program at the time I arrived, but this student's at the door. I get to know him. I'm asking, what's up? Who are you? And he tells me that he is an undergrad and that he is the president of the gospel choir. And he was trying to get to know me. But I remember when he first met me, he's like, oh my gosh, you're really here. We were talking about you in the cultural center. This idea of, oh my gosh, there is a new Black faculty member on campus, and we want to meet you. And ultimately, he wanted me to be advisor to the gospel choir, which of course I did for a little bit of time. Well, I remember getting all sorts of messages from, senior colleagues, some administrators, that was not a good use of my time. I should focus my time on my research. I should make sure that I'm, serving on, college and university-wide committees. Of course, I got promoted and tenured, so I did those things. But what I learned as a Black faculty member, core identity, that's me, right? Is that the involvement with students, showing up to their events, being present, was a lifeline both for me and for them. I learned about what our Black students needed, sometimes just by being at the spoken word event, and they happened to walk up and speak to me about something. It's because I showed up to show my support for the stroll party, for the fraternities and sororities, whatever it might have been, because I decided that day I'd grade papers in the cultural center versus grading it in my office. So I think the first thing is we've got to realize that proximity is important. And if we put ourselves in there, meet them where they are, so to speak, that it builds the kind of connections or pathways to the connections that I'm talking about today that will both strengthen them and, interestingly enough, I think strengthen us. I think the other thing that has to happen for Black faculty and staff, for students is, and this one's, it's Black History Month, so why not close on this one, right? We've got to show up, and we have to speak up. And I've met many Black faculty and staff all across the country who say to me some days, all right, Strayhorn, I'm for it. And some of them are like, look, I'm exhausted, I'm tired. Racial battle fatigue is real. And so you can't do it every day, I realize that. But quite often, we can speak to realities around climate that our students don't have the words or don't feel they have the voice. Or quite honestly, our institutions are not safe enough for them to be that courageous, to use the language of this conversation. So that's where we have to use our voices to affirm their experiences, to create space for their voices at the table. And if they can't, be there in person, then maybe we find ways to get to know them and hear them and listen to them. And then we raise those concerns when we're talking about gen ed requirements and whether or not it's really diverse enough and dealing with core issues like students dealing with inclusion, diversity, and race and racism and power and privilege, that we amplify their voices and their perspectives when it comes to which organizations get allocations and resources. Student organizations get the allocations and resources they need to put on the programs they need to meet the needs of our students, that we amplify their voices, speak for them about whether or not, our campus rituals and traditions around orientation or even graduation connect with them and their cultural centers in ways that, and I don't mean cultural centers, the building, but I mean them as people, as humans, with them and their humanity in ways that are appropriate. So I think that's what we can do, is we can speak up, we can connect with them, we can reach out to them, we can be present, we can, do all of these things that will signal to students that, again, I said earlier that students who come into a campus don't actually start with belonging, they start with belonging uncertainty. And when they're uncertain about their belonging, they start looking for signs like, hey, do I belong here? And quite often, this is for the Black faculty and staff that are listening, but also for the non-Black faculty, staff, and executive leader allies. This is why it's important for us to have diverse faculty and diverse leadership and diverse alumni, is that when students go looking, we want them to see, I'm going to close here, but let me share my screen one more time because there's a great illustration or picture that you saw before. We want them to see that they belong here. And if my screen is showing, it's that sign that I was at Kent State giving a lecture, did some work with that campus. They purchased this sign, put it on a wall. They were so proud to show me, Dr. Strayhorn, look what we've done with all the work we've been doing since you last, visited us. And my question was, does it work? Did that sign work? Well, I remember stopping a student, his name was Christian with the K, said, Christian, hey, look at that sign and tell me what it makes you think of. And he said, well, I don't know. It makes me feel like I matter, like I belong here. Well, there it is. It seems to work, so much so that Kent State is not the only to have it. Of course, University of Lynchburg as well. But I mean, I've seen lots of campuses where belonging becomes the message that we match with words and images to offer inclusive messages to students that we think about them, we're connected to them, we care about them, they matter to us. The problem I think we are going to have is that when we do this, when we invest in signs like that, we want students to actually arrive at our campus and then feel that sense of belonging. We don't want to just invest in signs and marquees and websites and videos and courageous conversations, and then students come and feel like, well, that was a big show, because I don't think they see me at all. I see no one like myself here. So I think that's where we can start to also be translators for students, navigators is what I call it, cultural navigators. Dr. Nicole, you and I have been in higher education. We know these campuses, we know the policies, and the experiences, but some of our students don't. So they need us to be cultural navigators, people who will help break down this new culture, declassify and decodify the language, help them understand the different, what office hours are and what a provost is and what credit hours are and what educational plans are and how to be successful. I think that's the role that we can play. Thanks for that.
I love it. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, we are at the hour, or 90 minutes, I should say. Mr. Props wants to thank you for introducing Dr. Strayhorn. Dr. Strayhorn, thank you so much for pouring into the University of Lynchburg, for your time and your expertise, and definitely your passion around sense of belonging and what it takes for institutions to be truly committed to the success of all of our students. So thank you again. And on behalf of the Office of Equity and Inclusion and all of our partners, thank you all for joining us today.